What are his best qualities?
His best qualities? Well, he's tenacious, he's articulate, he's erudite, he's exciting in a way, you know, he's unusual. You know, you don't often see political figures like Bannon. You certainly don't see them in such close proximity to power in the White House. So, you know, he might be like a once-in-a-lifetime figure. He's a guy who has created a belief system, an internally coherent belief system, which explained in some way the precarity and the insecurity felt by tens of millions of Americans. He captured a moment in history. Bannon, while being a prodigious leaker in private, actually had made very few public appearances, and I think this might have been his first big public appearance.
Thanks for being here.
You bet.
All right, guys, let's take a seat.
You know, there was a huge press pack at the back of the hall. His appearance generated huge amounts of interest.
CPAC is known for having important moments, and I think it's safe to say by a full room and just a couple of cameras that this is one of those moments.
And he commands the stage, you know, in a way that Reince Priebus just doesn't. You know, Bannon is a man who's in control.
If you want to see the Trump agenda, it's very simple. It was all in the speeches. He went around to these rallies, but those speeches had tremendous amount of content in them, right? I happen to believe, and I think many others do, he's probably the greatest public speaker in those large arenas since William Jennings Bryan. This was galvanizing. Remember, we didn't have any money. Hillary Clinton, these guys had over $2 billion. We had a couple of $100 million. It was those rallies and those speeches.
We don't want to win so much. We're getting tired of winning. It's getting boring.
All he's doing right now is he's laid out an agenda with those speeches, with the promises he made, and our job every day is just to execute on that. And that's what the mainstream media won't report. Just like they were dead wrong on the chaos of the campaign, and just like they were dead wrong in the chaos of the transition, they are absolutely dead wrong about what's going on today, because we have a team that's just grinding it through on what President Donald Trump promised the American people. And the mainstream media better understand something. All of those promises are going to be implemented.
That's awesome. It's been a... You know, Steve, you're a really likable guy. You should do this more often.
That's so bad.
He's not so bad.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
He has the vision, and he can articulate it in a really sort of compelling way, which perhaps had never been done before in just a few minutes. You know, he encapsulates the Trump project in a way that Trump, of course, never, ever could do. You can see they respond to it. He's the star of the show.
I kind of break it out into three verticals or three buckets. The first is kind of national security and sovereignty, and that's your intelligence, the Defense Department, Homeland Security. The second line of work is what I refer to as economic nationalism. The third, broadly, line of work is what is deconstruction of the administrative state.
Bannon has these three pillars of thinking. The first is national security and sovereignty. That's defending your homeland, whether that's building a wall between the US and Mexico, whether that's slapping travel bans on basically anybody from a country that happens to be Islamic.
The rule of law is going to exist when you talk about our sovereignty and you talk about immigration.
Then he has this whole idea of economic nationalism, in which you are promoting an economic system that is protectionist. It's there simply to protect your economy, and basically you don't care about the rest of the world, which is an isolationist idea which has never really worked out very well for America.
I think one of the most pivotal moments in modern American history was his immediate withdrawal from TPP. that got us out of a trade deal and let our sovereignty come back to ourselves and start to bring jobs, high value added manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America.
Then you've got this third pillar, which Bannon calls the kind of deconstruction of the administrative state. Now, by deconstruction, he's not saying destruction, even though to most people it frankly is. Deconstruction is a process of taking everything apart, looking at it and rebuilding it in a different way.
You know, it was also more narrowly a political project. He saw the bureaucracy as a point where his radical project to reimagine America would be halted. And so its deconstruction, its dismantlement is one of the first stages in the process of change.
But the third, this regulation, every business leader we've had in is saying not just taxes, but it is also the regulation. And I think the consistent, if you look at these cabinet appointees, they were selected for a reason, and that is the deconstruction. The way the progressive left runs is if they can't get it passed, they're just going to put it in some sort of regulation in an agency. That's all going to be deconstructed. And
if you can't do that and you can't win that battle, you can't really change anything. You can't get the policies through, you can't change the zeitgeist, you can't begin to change the prevailing culture, you can't begin to take on the institutions. And that, I think, is where Bannon's real interest probably lay. And because his time in office was ultimately short, they weren't really able to do that.
The reason Reince and I are good partners is that we can disagree. It's not only not going to get better, it's going to get worse every day in the media. And here's why. But by the way, the internal logic makes sense. They're corporatist, globalist media that are adamantly opposed to an economic nationalist agenda like Donald Trump has. President Trump really laid this out, as Reince said, many years ago at CPAC. It's really CPAC that really originally gave him the springboard. It's the first time at Breitbart we started seeing him and saw how people, his speeches resonated with people. And then he would go out to these smaller town halls later, and really he got traction with the same message he's bringing today. Here's why it's going to get worse, because he's going to continue to press his agenda. And as economic conditions get better, as more jobs get better, they're going to continue to fight. If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken.
Reince Priebus probably took it badly because he was blown off the stage. You know, Bannon was clearly the dominant character. And, you know, if the chief of staff is being blown off the stage by the chief strategist, people are going to look and say, well, who's in charge in the White House? Well, maybe it's the other guy. Maybe it's not the chief of staff. Maybe it's Bannon.
Hold on, let him think. I love how many collars he wears. Interesting look.
He was an absolutely key figure for 6 months, or probably nearly a year. He was one of the most important people in the world. Yeah, he was absolutely central to everything that was going on in the United States. From August 2016, when he joined the Trump campaign, to his leaving the White House a year or so later. No, he's a key figure in American history. Bannon's relationship with Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner is disintegrating several months into the presidency. His relationship with Reince Priebus is at an all-time low. Reince Priebus and Bannon leave the White House very close together. But Priebus is replaced by John Kelly, so a military man who's moved over from the Department of Homeland Security. Trump loves a general. He loves a general because of the way they look. You know, he used to talk about my generals. He liked being surrounded by generals in uniform. And Kelly was a top general, I think a 4-star general. And he had the look, he had the attitude, he looked fierce. And Trump brought him in as chief of staff. I think Trump was under some pressure to bring Kelly in because of the chaos, to put an end to the chaos that had defined the first 6 or 8 months of his presidency.
We just swore in General Kelly. He will do a spectacular job, I have no doubt, as Chief of Staff. What he's done in terms of homeland security is record-shattering. You look at the border, you look at the tremendous results we've had, and you look at the spirit. And with a very controversial situation, there's been very little controversy, which is pretty amazing by itself.
But it was quite clear that Kelly was not going to put up with Bannon, and Bannon's leaking and Bannon's chaos. So one of the first things that happens when Kelly takes over the Chief of Staff role is that Bannon is moved out, and that's the end of Bannon. But the White House, you know, it probably couldn't carry on functioning with that level of internecine warfare between the key players. So very quickly, Priebus goes, and Bannon goes. Okay, the family stays, Ivanka stays, Jared stays, but there's a new person in charge now, John Kelly, or at least he thinks he's a new person in charge, but he faces exactly the same problem that Reince Priebus did, which is having to manage Trump. But he spends most of his time managing up and not what he should be doing, which is managing down and organising the White House. It's possibly the most thankless job in the world, is being Trump's Chief of Staff.
Bannon probably, in hindsight, wanted to go much further than Trump did. I think probably Bannon was much more of a revolutionary, whereas Trump may have been, and indeed I think now history has shown, was probably more of a reactionary. You know, he loved alienating and irritating the elite, but once you gave Trump power, he didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, there wasn't really a kind of thought through, full-blown ideological project. It was a bit of status quo here, a bit of that, whereas I think had Bannon been allowed to stay in the White House, had been given real power, had been dominant over the Trump family, I think actually the Trump presidency would have looked completely different. I think it probably would have looked much more radical and revolutionary, and I suspect it probably would have looked quite a lot darker.
And this is why it had to be a coalition. This is why it had to be the Republican establishment. It had to be limited government conservatives. It had to be libertarians. It had to be populists. It had to be economic nationalists. It had to be evangelical Christians. If you have the wisdom, the strength, the tenacity to hold that coalition together, we will govern for 50 to 75 years. It's not about your race, your color, your gender, your religion, your ethnicity, your sexual preference. It's about one thing. Are you a citizen of the United States of America? Because if you're a citizen, there's certain responsibility and obligations that come with that. But as a citizen also, you should have preference for jobs and economic opportunities.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending Free Speech Friday.
Think of what went in to build this country. Are you prepared to give it up and let these elites take it and just give it away? That's the power that elected Donald Trump. That's the power that's going to elect Roy Moore tomorrow. That's the power they fear. You know what they're doing? They're trying to shut up President Trump and Judge Moore. They're trying to shut you up. To Mitch McConnell and Senator Shelby, this is a national election. It is the Trump miracle versus the nullification project. Now, they couldn't beat Trump and they couldn't beat you. Lock her up.
Fake news would tell you that we don't care for Jews. I tell you all this because I've seen it all, so I just want to set the record straight while they're here. One of our attorneys is a Jew.
we're up to our neck in alligators. We're up to the neck in people that don't want change in Washington, D.C. They wanted to keep it the same, keep their power, keep their prestige, and keep their position. And we've got to change that.
Trump's MO is to dump on somebody when he fires them, rubbish them. Trump starts referring to Bannon as Sloppy Steve in public.
I guess Sloppy Steve brought him into the White House quite a bit.
But Trump needs Bannon in a way. You know, he respects Bannon. He respects Bannon's articulacy. He respects his ability to articulate the Trump project in a coherent way, in a way that Trump never could do himself. And so, like many of the people that Trump sacks, he stays in contact with them, but by phone. If they're useful to Trump, he'll make a relationship with them. And Bannon was useful. Bannon was very useful to Trump.
I don't know, he called me a great man last night, so, you know, he obviously changed his tune pretty quick. I don't talk to him. That's just a misnomer.
Bannon playing cleanup on his radio show.
The President of the United States is a great man. You know, I support him day in and day out.
But behind the scenes, the president still fuming, according to several aides, after Bannon questioned the president's grasp of policy in the new book, Fire and Fury, and even accused Mr. Trump's son and son-in-law of treason for meeting with a Russian lawyer during the campaign.
So Bannon called this potential meeting treasonous. They'd already parted company at this point by the time the book's published. The book's published, I think, January 2018, and Bannon's the major source for the book, and he's gone back to Breitbart News, where he's taken up his old role. Trump goes nuclear.
I consider it a work of fiction, and I think it's a disgrace that somebody's able to have something, do something like that. The libel laws are very weak in this country. If they were strong, it would be very helpful. You wouldn't have things like that happen where you can say whatever comes to your head. But just so you know, I never interviewed with him in the White House at all. He was never in the Oval Office. We didn't have an interview. And I did a quick interview with him a long time ago having to do with an article. But I don't know this man. I guess Sloppy Steve brought him into the White House quite a bit, and it was one of those things. That's why Sloppy Steve is now looking for a job.
And the Mercers have to choose. They really have to choose between Trump and Bannon. And they, of course, choose Trump. And so Bannon leaves his post at Breitbart and is sort of not exactly cast into the wilderness, but, you know, he's this sort of project which he'd been building for several years. He's forced to leave it.
This is a pretty dramatic falling out between the president and someone who worked on his campaign and also worked in this White House very close to him every day. What led to this quite dramatic falling out, and was it the loss of Roy Moore in that Senate race that was mentioned in the statement? You mentioned that they had last talked in early December. Is this a direct response to Steve Bannon calling the president's son unpatriotic and saying that he committed treason?
I think there are a number of factors that played in. I would certainly think that going after the president's son in an absolutely outrageous and unprecedented way is probably not the best way to curry favor with anybody.
If President Trump gets through the next 4 to 6 months of investigation, he will be reelected right now, I believe, with potentially actually a bigger number than he did in 2016. You know, I was there and saw it with my own eyes. If after 2 years of investigation, the best that Mueller can do is Roger Stone and WikiLeaks, give me a break. There was zero collusion with the Russians in the 2016 election.
Thank you very much for inviting me. For him, it was about what does he do after the White House? What does he do now being on the outside of the White House? And I think probably Europe was, in his mind, the obvious next step. You had crunch elections, you had political parties and leaders that were clearly beginning to do quite well, and I think in his mind it was very much about trying to attach himself to new movements or new vehicles that would allow him to maximize his influence.
He gets into bed all over Europe, frankly, with some really distasteful people. And I think this is when it's a moot point as to where you think Steve Bannon crossed the line. But certainly after he leaves the White House, he ends up getting into bed with more and more distasteful people.
Look at these campaigns. It's not all negativism. It's about what they can be as countries. It's about saving their country. It's not just fear and loathing. That's an oversimplification.
I met Steve Bannon over coffee at a hotel in Mayfair, London. My impression of him at that time was that he was clearly feeling that world events were moving in his direction, was clearly feeling that Europe was about to follow America, and was very busy networking and making relationships and forging links with people on this side of the Atlantic. And so when I met him at that particular time, remember this is before we enter the second part of Trump's presidency, I think he felt that the world was his oyster, and he was very aware of his influence. I remember sitting across the table from Steve Bannon and looking at a copy of my book that he'd read, and the notes were endless. I mean, he seemed to give the impression that he consumes and digests research incredibly quickly and moves on to the next thing.
No. Actually, to be fair, you said you disagreed with Tommy Robinson on Islam.
But before the break, you said he wasn't. Before the break, you said he wasn't Islamophobic.
Well, I said I don't know if he.
Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is fascist and it's violent, and we've had enough.
I don't know if Islamic phobia about shipping guys out and stuff like that. I don't know if Tommy's like that. I mean, but he and I disagree about the religion of Islam. Okay, but I don't think Tommy's a bad guy. I think he's a solid guy, and I think he's got to be released from prison.
I think the vote for Brexit was very important for populists around the world. It demonstrated that voters could be led to rebel against the established elite in a democracy that historically has not really had populist revolts. I think it also showed many people around the world, including Steve Bannon and Donald Trump, that there was a deep reservoir of public disillusionment with the status quo.
The bastion of independence.
And that in every Western society that was probably there and could be mobilized and could be turned into a serious political project. So actually, on one level, it's tempting to see Brexit as something that was inherently British, was about Britain's relationship with the European Union. But actually, for many people around the world, including Bannon, I think Brexit was proof of concept that you can mobilize the masses against the elite.
Allora vi chiedo un grande applauso per Steve Bannon.
That's why, of everything that's going on, even in Brexit and even with Trump, with all the resistance, yours is the most important experiment. Because here, you're trying to make it work with people putting aside sometimes foundational principles to try to make it work. That's why all the media is here. It's not to see some schmendrick like me. It's because they want to look at every mistake your government makes. I've dedicated my life to this populist movement in the United States, and now with the movement, with my partners in Belgium, we're starting this group called The Movement, which is a loose association of like-minded parties and individuals. And after the November elections, when President Trump defeats the cultural Marxist Democratic Party and is not impeached, I will be spending, 80% of my time in Europe in preparation for the European parliamentary elections. If the brothers of Italy and the League and others put their shoulder to the wheel, like you have shown in the past, and stand for decency and grit and common sense, that you can not just have tremendous electoral results in the spring of 19, but send a message to Brussels.
One of the tensions was that many populist movements have been on the go in Europe for 30 years, 40 years. Many of the people that he's talked to and talked about come from movements that have a very rich history. Marine Le Pen, Matteo Salvini, the Austrian Freedom Party. These are movements that can often be traced back to the 1970s, if not much earlier. So, the kind of American coming over and professing his worldview and what needed to be done was always going to be a risky balancing act, because many of these movements have been doing it for 40, 50 years, right? So they view Trump as being late to the party, whereas some of the Trumpists view these movements as being, the new boys on the block. So there was always that tension between the two. But Bannon clearly saw potential in trying to bring these movements together and trying to give them some sense of organization and unity. And, if you look historically at populist movements in Europe, one thing that has run through them all, even the successful ones, is that they've not really ever managed to unify and to coordinate and to project a unified front. So unlike communist parties or socialist parties or green parties at the European level that have always kind of, been pretty good at coordinating, national populists have struggled for good reasons. I mean, they're nationalists, so they've always argued over territory and history and, who gets what.
I think Bolsonaro, along with Salvini, are two of the most important politicians in the world, on the world stage. People like the League and National Rally, they're much more sophisticated even than political parties in America. The best thing I can do for them is exactly what I did for Trump. And the key thing I did for Trump is just tell him when he was 10, 12, 14 points down, you can win this. Just stick to the message and you can win this. We are focused on Germany, and particularly working with Alternative for Deutschland. We are working obviously with the National Rally in France. We're very close to Marine Le Pen and Louis Allo and the rest of the team.
Mr. Bannon. Mr. Bannon. Mr. Bannon. Mr. Bannon.
France and Italy and these other parties together is quite powerful, but they have the ability to put aside some differences and to really form a super group that will have real critical mass, and I think will punch above its weight as far as a group goes. That's why I think these next 3 or 4 weeks are going to be vitally important. The integration movement, which is what the EU has always been about, that continual, inexorable pull is dead. You will not see in Brussels Juncker or any of that crowd pushing for more integration. They understand the people in Europe backed off that. That's the historic thing of yesterday. 2 years ago, almost to the week, after Brexit and Trump, Macron had ended it. He was a product of the system. The defeat of Le Pen was not just a defeat, it was a public humiliation. And I think she's the key that picks the lock. Salvini will clearly be there. I think Le Pen is the one that can be magnanimous or show wisdom. I think she's shown incredible wisdom. I don't think she gets the credit for this. I think she's not just an astute tactical politician, she actually understands strategy. I think she understands the importance of the supergroup. I'm a friend and colleague. I will make observations and give my opinions where they saw. No, absolutely not. I've never taken a penny in any political activity. Trump never paid me. I've never taken a penny. The first time I ever went to a campaign office is the day I took over as Trump's CEO. I'm not a professional political. I'm not a professional political consultant. I probably could turn into.
Trump is struggling to get money from Congress to build the wall. Throw him an odd billion here or there to repair the wall. They're not going to give him any money for new wall. And so Bannon and a couple of associates hatched this plan to solicit private donations from, well, not only from Trump supporters, but for people who want to build a wall. And I think they raised something like $25 million.
You know, this is a private tax fund that you know what you're getting. This money is going directly to fund a wall on the southern border. We have been down on that border every single day nearly for the last 2 months, meeting with contractors.
And they don't spend it on the wall, of course. They use it for their own interests. There's lots of people on the right who use the Trump White House to enrich themselves, but I don't think anyone has done it so brazenly as Steve Bannon.
Hang on, just one second. I just got a question. I was lit up early. I did an interview with British television, and they were lighting me up. There's no crisis at the border. There's, you know, this is all made up. This is Trump's fantasy land. I have a question for the Terry family. The Border Patrol. Does the Border Patrol want to see a wall or not?
Yes. 100%.
And why?
For their safety, for your safety, and for every other American's safety.
It's called fear. The fear of God.
What this is about is, you know, they just gave Trump the finger today. The American people need to stand up and show them that they mean business. And we're going to keep this project going. We start building this wall next month. We're going to be breaking ground.
Thank you very much for joining us, guys. Have a big cheer. Thank you, America. Really, thank you.
Steve Bannon has been arrested and indicted by the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, federal prosecutors in Manhattan. For more on that, we'll get to our Eamon Javers. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, Carl, this news just coming out from the Southern District of New York saying that Steve Bannon and 3 other men have been arrested and indicted, charged in relation to their role in a nonprofit organization called We Build the Wall. It's a crowdfunding organization that the SDNY says has raised about $25 million.
This entire fiasco is to stop people who want to build the wall. Get in front. Hey, get inside the car. Get inside the car. No, get the guy in front.
He's a very clever guy. He's very erudite. You know, he has a good command of history. You know, what led him to think that this would be a good idea? It's baffling in a way. Well, it's baffling in every way. And this led, of course, to Trump's pardon of Bannon. But Trump can only pardon federal crimes. So Bannon is still on the hook for this as a state crime. He's had one get out of jail card cash by Trump. There's no others available to him.
In August 2020, as many of you know, Bannon and 3 other individuals were indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York for crimes related to this fundraising scheme. And then, just months later, Mr. Bannon received a presidential pardon from President Donald J. Trump, former President Donald J. Trump. Because the simple truth is that it is a crime to profit off the backs of donors by making false pretenses.
Comment? This is an irony. On the very day the mayor of this city has a delegation down on the border They're persecuting people here. They're trying to stop them on the border. This is all about 60 days from the day. We have 60 days from the day. 60 days.
Too often, powerful political interest, they ignore these rules. They think that they are above the law. And the most egregious of them take advantage of hard-working Americans in the process. And Steve Bannon stands out as a perfect example of this blatant inequality. He gained power and influence as a top advisor to the former president. He preyed upon the emotions of New Yorkers and Americans. And then when Mr. Bannon was held accountable for his criminal actions, the former president pardoned him. Given this reality, it is understandable how hard-working, honest, ordinary citizens are cynical about the two systems of justice in our country. One for the rich and powerful, and another for everyone else. But in New York, we have zero tolerance for corruption and/or for abuses of power.
For every conservative in America, this is what happens in the last days of a dying regime. They will never shut me up. They'll have to kill me first. I have not yet begun to fight. Coming out the middle door. 2 months to the day that we have the most important midterm election since 1862, since the Civil War. And I built the dominant platform in all media for grassroots participation. This is why we won the school boards. This is why people are coming to become election workers and poll workers and election judges, because every day we build the grassroots. And they try to go with 60 days left, just like they did in 2020, and make sure they can shut me down and take me out of it. I got news for them. I have not yet begun to fight.
The theory of prosecution appears to now focus on Mr. Bannon without any new facts in the case. Mr. Bannon is intending to fight these charges all the way through. He is not guilty of anything that he's charged with or with any crime. And in terms, they raised today the idea of the contempt charges in the U.S. District Court in D.C. Those charges will be overturned on appeal. The appeal is bulletproof in that case.
Say you took money, Mr. Bannon. How do you respond to that? Administrative state. The administrative state.
It said you frauded Americans. How do you respond?
Every one of you in this audience is nothing but a pauper. You know why you're a pauper? Because the Federal Reserve, the oligarchs on Wall Street, the oligarchs in Silicon Valley, in the Uniparty in Washington, D.C. Don't ask me. Look at your own lived experience. Today, go home and look at your bank account. See what inflation is doing to you. See what's happening in your capital markets. You're all in bondage.
Did you defraud Americans? Was the Build the Wall a scheme? Was Build the Wall a scheme?
America safe again. And we will make America great again.
To be what is now the mainstream of the Republican Party, which is, the Trump part of the Republican Party, it's not about where you stand on policy. It's not a policy position. It's essentially determined about your position on Trump and the 2020 election. So to be part of the Trump crowd, to be part of this group, you have to be an election denier. That's it. That's the litmus test. It's not a policy test. It's you have to show your allegiance to Trump. I mean, I don't know. What were they expecting? Did they think? So there's a crowd outside the Ellipse. Trump gives a speech. Other people give a speech. They encourage them to march down to the Capitol, to Congress. What did they expect would happen there? The the members of Congress would look out the window and see this big crowd and then stop certifying the election? I mean, I don't know what they were expecting at that moment.
I think those events were clearly shaped by narratives that were rife on the right of American politics about the legitimacy or the perceived illegitimacy of the 2020 election. I think that they were narratives that were wholly focused on presenting the American elite as being manipulative, anti-democratic, and opposed to the view of the people, the voice of the forgotten people. Some of those narratives can be traced back through the Trump presidency. Some of those narratives clearly were shaped and influenced by the legacy of Steve Bannon. I don't know if he was personally involved in January the 6th or if he was advocating for that, but I think it's certainly fair to say that many of the people who participated in those events were clearly influenced by the ideology of Trumpism, and that in turn was shaped by many of the people that were around Trump.
Based on the committee's investigation, it appears that Mr. Bannon had substantial advanced knowledge of the plans for January 6th, and likely had an important role in formulating those plans. Mr. Bannon was in the war room at the Willard on January 6th. He also appears to have detailed knowledge regarding the president's efforts to sell millions of Americans the fraud that the election was stolen. In the words of many who participated in the January 6th attack, the violence that day was in direct response to President Trump's repeated claims from election night through January 6th that he had won the election. The American people are entitled to Mr. Bannon's firsthand testimony about all of these relevant facts.
As part of the ongoing investigation into the January the 6th events of the Capitol, that Steve Bannon was called to give evidence regarding his role in those events and activities.
Bannon refuses to cooperate with Congress because he feels he's above it. He feels that this is not something he should feel obliged to do as a free citizen. You know, it's two fingers to the establishment, as simple as that.
I'm telling you right now, this is going to be the misdemeanor from hell for Merrick Garland, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden ordered Merrick Garland to prosecute me from the White House lawn when he got off Marine One. And we're going to go on the offense. We're tired of playing defense. We're going to go on the offense on this and stand by. Every progressive and every liberal in this country that likes freedom of speech and liberty, okay, should be fighting for this case. That's why I'm here today, for everybody. I'm never going to back down, and they took on the wrong guy this time.
Things that are said could be interpreted by Trump and others as collaboration with the enemy. So it's best not to say anything, rather than go there and say something that you might deeply regret afterwards.
Mr. Bannon acted as his lawyer counseled him to do by not appearing and by not turning over documents in this case. He didn't refuse to comply.
He wants to be seen as an outsider who's willing to take on the elite, who doesn't want to play by their rules. Somebody who relishes in being a populist maverick, a renegade, and who is keenly aware that his brand is now completely dependent upon that image. So, you know, any opportunity that he has to push that, I think, is important to him. I think the other consideration is that the Trump moment is not over. I think Bannon is keenly aware that Trump will probably run again for president, or that Trump will remain a guiding influence on the Republican Party. So from a purely selfish point of view, maintaining and upgrading his brand as an anti-elite agitator outsider is also something that makes complete sense to him.
Look, it was a very good first day. It was a long day for jury selection. I really want to thank all the jurors for being truthful and blunt. I thought that was great. And we look forward to tomorrow. We're coming back and we get into it tomorrow. So we're looking forward. And I think we would have been more productive if we'd been on Capitol Hill in front of open mics addressing the nation
with exactly all this nonsense, this show trial they've been putting up on Capitol Hill. It's nothing but a show trial. It's time they start having other witnesses and give other testimony other than what they've been putting up.
They put forward an argument today that completely tears asunder constitutional principle of separation of powers. So think about it. Any citizen gets a subpoena from Congress, hires an experienced lawyer. The lawyer tells that citizen, you may not comply. Not we ought to think about it. Former president invoked executive privilege. You may not comply. Again, you can debate whether he could have complied in part or in full. He listened to his lawyer. It's not an intuitive process.
Buddy, I only have one disappointment, and that is the gutless members of that show trial committee. The J6 committee didn't have the guts to come down here and testify in open court.
This is something he does deliberately. You know, he can afford to take the $6,000 fine. That's $6,000 of pure golden publicity all over the globe. You know, 4 months in jail, if he ever ends up serving it, so what? It doesn't bother him at all. In fact, I think Bannon would be the type of man who'd regard a jail sentence given to him for failing to turn up to Congress as kind of a way an actor would regard an Oscar. It would prove how much of a disruptor he is by being sent to jail. He likes being the bad boy.
I think a lot of people who are drawn into these movements, who flirt with the fringes and who are trying to stretch the Overton window of what's acceptable and what's allowed, I think are always people who have the potential to be dangerous, certainly, because they can sometimes create things that end up getting momentum and end up getting a degree of power that they can't always control. The line between critiquing the system and advocating for radical reform and political violence is a very, very thin line.
Just a few days before the election, Steve Bannon, a former Trump chief White House strategist and outside advisor to President Trump, spoke to a group of his associates from China and said this.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
As you know, Mr. Bannon refused to testify in our investigation. He's been convicted of criminal contempt of Congress, and he's awaiting sentencing. But the evidence indicates that Mr. Bannon had advanced knowledge of Mr. Trump's intent to declare victory falsely on election night, but also that Mr. Bannon knew about Mr. Trump's planning for January 6th. Here's what Bannon said on January 5th.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's all converging, and now we're on, as they say, the point of attack, right? The point of attack tomorrow. I'll tell you this, it's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in. You have made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day. So strap in, let's get ready.
Can't we all just get along? That's not my line. So, as you know, Mr. Bannon was sentenced today.
Stop pushing, buddy. You were here last
As
time.
usual,
We love that vote.
as usual, the judge listened carefully and entered a decision that he thought was appropriate. We certainly fully respect the judge's decision, but we will be filing a notice of appeal, as the judge indicated.
The American people are weighing and measuring what went on with the Justice Department and how they comported themselves. They're weighing and measuring that right now, and they will vote on November 8th.
Can you treat it fairly? American judicial system's correct. What would you say to the vote? What would you say to the vote?
Hang on.
I come to Washington. I swear in on January 3rd. I get accused of giving insurrection tours, which I thought was hilarious because I couldn't even find the bathroom in the Capitol. True story. Then January 6th happens, and next thing you know, I organized the whole thing along with Steve Bannon here. And I want to tell you something, if Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
Hey, gents, how we doing?
Any words? Yeah. See, that's the whole joke, isn't it? They say that whole thing was planned, and I'm like, are you kidding me? A bunch of conservatives, Second Amendment supporters went in the Capitol without guns, and they think that we organized that? I don't think so.
On your balls and fucking destroy your life!
Merry Christmas!
Fuck you! Happy holidays and a happy Hanukkah! Not to Jesus Christ!
And this is a broader question over how mainstream Democrats respond to populism. There is an indirect response, which is tackling the grievances that are leading people to vote for these movements. And there is a direct response, which is going after the people who are actively leading and shaping these movements. The risk with that strategy of going after the individuals is that it can often sometimes just look like persecution. And you end up exacerbating rather than soothing their supporters.
Good morning, gents. Good morning. Fine Navy Day. How many days is this crisis in Brazil? How many days? No. 75 days. There's been millions of people in the streets in Brazil protesting, tens of millions, and the mainstream media is not covering it. Tens of millions. Tens of millions. Tens of millions. Just check it.
An ideal Bannon world would be a very small state existing just on a national level with no federalism across continents, in which people wouldn't be seen as kind of economic units. There'd be kind of like in warrior roles or priest roles, almost a kind of perfect kind of medieval society. It's a society based on sort of mysticism rather than capitalism. You know, he is very esoteric. People forget this. Bannon is really out there.
Steve Bannon will probably go down in history, rightly or wrongly, as one of the most influential people within the US Republican movement who will be intimately connected in the history books with the presidency of Donald Trump, who will be closely associated with the global populist movement against the established elite, who will probably be seen as a threat to American democracy, as somebody who helped set the stage for some of the violence and confrontation that we've seen since the end of the first Trump presidency, and as somebody who captured the zeitgeist at the time, somebody who tapped into this mood in America, but not just restricted to America, a mood of anti-establishment populism, somebody who understood that there are millions of people who don't feel represented in the political system, and he was willing to do whatever he needed to do to rally them into politics. And as a consequence, He will be remembered by Democrats as somebody who weakened the American Republic, as somebody who undermined democratic norms. And among Republicans, he will probably be remembered as somebody who helped deliver them the infamous victory of 2016, but perhaps over the longer term, as somebody who may have led the Republicans into a cul-de-sac, as somebody who may have led the Republicans away from a much more sustainable path to ongoing dominance over the political system. We'll have to wait and see.